So every year we get bad or pretty average anime adaptations, right? Pretty straightforward. What's worse, however, is when you're really excited for your favorite manga to finally get that anime. It's been years in the making and it turns out to be so incredibly mediocre, just not good. And there's usually a lot of reasons for this, but mostly boils down to a lot of the corporation business side of things not allowing their talent to be able to cook appropriately. Two of the biggest issues that plague the anime industry currently is the inefficient time and scheduling, which is absolutely horrendous. So never giving your animators enough time to actually cook and make something that they're really happy about, but also just money, living conditions, paying your staff, talent, hardworking people the right amount of money so they can function properly as human beings. All of this work and all of this grinding that they're putting into this show only to be paid shekels, lowest amount possible. Nickel and diming your own employees is horrendous, and a majority of the times it's going to get the better of them. I have a lot of respect for the talent that have worked on all of these shows that I'm about to talk about. I think they've done everything they could given the time they probably had, and the mistreatment from the corporations and big studio heads above. Tokyo Ghoul really gets under my skin. For a lot of you probably feel the same way, or maybe even kind of in the middle. While it did provide a lot of interesting perspective and a different kind of approach or take on the Tokyo Ghoul story, it just kind of fell apart very quickly. As much as it had direction, it became very directionless after its first season, completely missing massive chunks of the story and not even bothering to adapt any of the source material appropriately. They managed to cover all of that story, including the ending, in a short amount of episodes. Ridiculously small. It wasn't a good time. It was never going to be a good time. You cut out characters, you cut out events, you cut out massive portions of the story, and you get something that's just a shallow reflection of what it could have been. Even artistically, the story has no continuity between itself. Season 1 looks entirely different to Route A. Route A isn't even part of the story, it's original. That looks different to Tokyo Ghoul Re Season 1. So even if you've never read the manga, you're getting a story that isn't even consistent within itself. No wonder so many people were confused about it when it launched. Season 1 was kind of a ride, even though I personally think artistically and kind of thematically it was all over the place and never really consistent with Tokyo Ghoul's manga at all. It did have some visually impressive moments and some pretty good story elements being introduced, especially with the character voice acting and the music work. It was very nice. It's just when you start to take it serious is where it falls apart. Completely covered with a ton of censorship, rushed out the door as fast as possible, and it hurts even more because this is one of your most popular manga in recent years. Tokyo Ghoul was a phenomenon. It captured the world by storm. Everyone was talking about this story, so for it to get a below average, extremely mediocre anime that covers its entire story, I couldn't even recommend it. It's crazy to me that I can't even really use pictures from the anime because the licensing behind it is so incredibly busted. It's broken. God forbid I put a picture from season 1 of Tokyo Ghoul Re, like just a normal picture, and I'll probably get striked or claimed for it because they're very much weird about it. This story deserved better. This anime deserved better. Shame on all of the corporate heads that just seen it as a way to make a bit of money off a very popular title that was growing exceptionally well year by year. Berserk seems pretty standard here. I feel like anytime any studio has tried to adapt Berserk, it just does not go well. Whether it be a movie, whether it be back in the early 2000s, whether it be the one from 2016, everything just seems like a weird interpretation or a take on it that just completely misses the point of Berserk in a lot of different ways. Visually, they've never really captured the identity of Berserk, which doesn't seem like a difficult thing to do. It's a very dark and brooding story. You pay enough attention to it and you should be able to mimic that pretty well. I wouldn't even say a lot of the animation feats behind it would be that difficult. It's more of a narrative driven story just laced with a ton of brutal action, and that action isn't otherworldly or would be incredibly time consuming to make in a nutshell. I say that respectfully, but when you have corporate over your head trying to push things out the door, of course you can't do all that work easily or quickly. Berserk is a really rough one. It's iconic. It's one of the most well recognized popular manga on this planet. It has inspired so many incredible stories, so many different interpretations thematically, and for it to not get that due respect in an animation format, whether it be a singular season or a movie, it just feels wrong that it's been neglected for so long. And then every attempt for them to try and do it, they just don't care enough. They just want to squeeze as much money out of such a popular franchise as much as possible so they can just do whatever they want. And this isn't just me disliking the CGI being used in a lot of these shows. I enjoy CGI. I enjoy when it's done artistically. I enjoy when there's a creative element and interpretation behind it that you can paste all of it onto. There's so many beautiful CGI CGI shows that I've watched that have been respectful for the talent's time to be able to utilize it. However, it's always seemed that CGI in a lot of bad cases have been used because they don't have enough time, because they can get it in there as quick as they can and kind of rough something up, put it all together. Berserk will forever leave a sour taste in my mouth, but I do hope that one day, sometime within the future, a studio that respects the legacy of Berserk and respects the legacy of Miura can do it justice. He deserves it, the story deserves it, the world, the characters deserve it, how much it's inspired others alone, it deserves it. I'm positive there's so many incredible people that want to work on this show. Give them the time they need to do it and you will have something so beautiful. Even if it's just one season, I could take that. Kingdom is a funny one for me because they've tried to do Kingdom a multitude of different times. I think from the early 2000s there was a couple of movies that were alright, and then the long-running anime was really bad, and then they redone it recently and the first season was kind of average, but now they're kind of getting better with it. But I believe they're jumping over a ton of material because there's just so much of Kingdom to go through, so it's all kind of weird and all over the place, yet they're still kind of committed to it, which is impressive, but at the same time super weird business-wise. If you didn't know, let me paint this picture. Kingdom is one of, if not the most successful weekly seinen stories of all time. Before Tokyo Ghoul was a thing, Kingdom was the top-running, top-selling, best-selling seinen weekly for forever. Nothing touched it. It was competing with Big Shonen, it was competing with One Piece a lot of the time. It was always top 3, top 5 best-sold manga every single year, and mind you, that's without an English release. That's without being translated or localized into other different languages. For a long time it was only Japan. Over the years they finally stepped out of their boundaries and went over to France and went over to Spanish, I believe, but still not English yet. That's probably due to the political nature of the story being very rooted in a lot of Chinese origin, so I imagine it might be a little bit weird. But they have never done a good anime for this. At least they have never done it justice. Kingdom is such a beautifully told story that has so much going for it. Political warfare is hard to do, I get it. There's a ton of things on screen, a ton of people fighting each other, and I imagine that it is a nightmare to even think about animating. However, for business and the way corporations probably look at it, it's just too difficult. Which is disappointing, and I don't think we'll ever get a true, extremely good Kingdom anime adaptation, which is what we deserve. However, if you do enjoy what they have now, which personally I haven't really watched all too much of, I'm not entirely the biggest fan of the approach that they took. If you're enjoying that, I'm happy for you. You deserve it. At least you're getting something. Not to mention the Kingdom live action films I believe are actually pretty good. So if you want to watch anything Kingdom related that isn't the anime, go watch the live action movies. You'll probably have a better time. The Promised Neverland pains me deeply because the first season was so incredible, so impeccable, had everyone on the edge of their seats. No one really knew what they were getting into, and the way they end that first episode, wow. Like, what a way to introduce yourself into the industry. Obviously the manga had the exact same effect, but if you're watching this for the first time, it takes you off guard. You don't expect it. For me, this really put The Promised Neverland on the map, and I was curious on how much content they would actually cover because it is quite a lengthy story, but not impossible to do. Unfortunately, just like everything else on this list, not enough time. Trying to squeeze every single dollar out of it. I find kind of crazy because you see how well the first season's received, how much time and effort went into that, so much beautiful talent, getting all of that put together. Atmospherically, it was gorgeous, it was consistent, it felt horrifying, and then it just lost sight of itself. It cut massive chunks of the story out, whole arcs out the story, and then kind of merged things together just so they could get to the ending quicker. And you have kind of an odd political take on the story that's so convoluted and confusing to follow because half the story's been cut. I'm not too sure what they were expecting to get with that one. It is a shame because of how good the first season was. It's also a shame how much of good content they actually cut because there's a whole arc there, Goldie Pond, I believe. Fun as hell, such a great arc to read. That would have been really good in an anime format, but they decided to just jump towards the ending, skip everything out in the middle. It lost its lure, it lost its mystery, it lost its sense of adventure, and any sort of political, moral, ethical debate or meaning got skewered in how much content they were actually cutting. By the end of it, you have a shell of what The Promised Neverland was. I'm gonna put this in here because I kind of find it funny. Look at this, really cool. Now look at this, completely different vibe. I don't know what the approach for this was or what the idea for this was. Like, I assumed with maybe a year or two more into like figuring out the CGI and having it tuned in better with the theme or the idea of what Arjun was, it might have actually turned out pretty well. It just seemed like they didn't have enough time to do anything properly, and everything was kind of just cuddled together as quick as possible, like everything else on this list. Arjun was gritty and dark and kind of just disgusting, and also had its big political meaning and messages alongside personal identity. Yet we get here and it's just none of it, which is extremely disappointing because of how kind of newly popular this story was getting, garnering a lot of traction. A lot of people were finding out about it and really enjoying it, and the first thing they see is just something that's just not a good representation of it whatsoever. The anime you watch and the manga you read, two different stories, two different things. They try to tell the manga story, but it just doesn't feel the same at all. It feels entirely watered down and just not what you want at all. For me, the reason all these stories are bad is not because of the talent, not because of the people actually bringing it to life, but because they weren't given the time to do it properly. That's the issue nowadays. That's the issue from 10 years ago. That's the issue from 30 years ago. The complete misuse, toxic workplace environment that these people have to go through, only for their passion to be squandered by the inability of money-hungry people. At the end of the day, no one wins. Not even the people with the money. That's all I got, however. Let me know your thoughts. I'll see you all later.